Hello, everyone. Welcome to an VNture podcast, your weekly visual novel podcast with host Taros113 and MR. This week's episode is going to be about fourth wall breaks in visual novels. This is a very interesting concept that's been explored by several visual novels, some modern and some more classic. And MR and I wanted to discuss some of the details and finer points in these fourth wall distinctions. So first off, MR, why don't you take it away by first, to anyone who's not aware of the term, what does the fourth wall mean?
Yeah, so hello to all listeners. I'll briefly mention some definitions, and I briefly also will mention meta, which is in vein kind of related, and I'll probably mention that as well. But let's start with breaking the fourth wall. And I'll be using Wikipedia definitions. So, breaking the fourth wall is a violation of convention in a performance. This can be done by either directly referring to the audience, the play as a play, or the character's fictionality. So this is brief description for the breaking the fourth wall.
Mm-hmm.
As for meta...
Oh, if I can jump in for a sec.
Sure.
It's... The fourth wall term is named that because in theater, you have three stages up on the... three walls up on the stage.
Three walls.
Yes, three walls. One on the left side, one on the right side, and one on the back side. Now, there is, though, an invisible fourth wall between the players, the actors on the stage, and the audience members. But of course, it's not a physical fourth wall, because then you wouldn't be able to see into the action.
Exactly.
Like, if it's a play set in an apartment, you're only going to see three of those walls of the apartment, and we all simply assume there is a fourth one. They're all acting within the confines of a singular room. So breaking the fourth wall is whenever one of those characters speaks to the audience. They jump through that invisible barrier and break the separation between audience and story.
Yep, and this is the violation of convention I mentioned before.
Exactly.
Okay, and going to the meta, which is a word derived from Greek, meaning after or beyond. It's used as a prefix, meaning more comprehensive or something that is transcending, which could be related to breaking the fourth wall some of the times, maybe not all of the times. Also, as an introduction to the topic at hand and how we'll tackle it, I don't believe VNs need to necessarily be wholly from start to finish breaking the fourth wall, but can incorporate aspects of it, more or less, depending on the title itself.
Definitely. It gets a little vague sometimes with how much a title breaks the fourth wall, or if they they tease with breaking it, but they keep the story intact. And also, like you said, about elements of being meta, where a VN, or any story to be honest, examines itself as a story through and start analyzing some of its aspects, some of the plot hooks, some of the story exposition elements, some of the conflict elements, and they start viewing itself as a story.
Yep, exactly.
This sometimes goes hand in hand with fourth wall breaks, but not always.
Yes, and in this today's episode, we'll have a pleasure to discuss our approaches, our stance on the matter, and our examples from our experience reading visual novels. So without further ado, let's start with a title that was a cultural phenomenon in the recent years, and what a title it was. It's Doki Doki Literature Club. So, to summarize it, it's an innocent title about schoolmates running a literature club. What could possibly go wrong?
To be honest, that entirely is the premise. You, the main character, just get roped into joining a literature club. That is it.
Yeah, Yeah, that's it.
And you talk with the classmates and you write some poetry and stuff. Innocent as that.
Exactly, yeah. And probably, especially for those who do not know, let me set the stage that this is the one title I would say it's leaning heavier on the breaking the fourth wall than other title I know and reference throughout this episode.
Yes.
Despite its very inconspicuous description and its innocent nature, it delves very deep into the fourth wall breaking.
Yes, it's pretty much impossible to spoil it from anyone nowadays, since it's what the bulk of the VN is about, and that's what it's most famous for. But yes, Doki Doki Literature Club breaks the fourth wall, and things quickly go off the rails for the poor main character, and for the reader.
True. And it's I think it also combines that with a meta aspect. And again, we'll talk about the boundaries between all of those. But I think the mere fact that at sub-level progression it involves game file manipulation, I would say this definitely qualifies as a meta aspect of that game.
And how so?
Again, spoilers are impossible to avoid, but I'm just saying, I would say manipulate files outside of the game in order to progress inside the game would constitute as something transcending the game itself. Therefore, very meta.
Yes, and also, several story beats and character motivations stem from the characters realizing that there is more to what's going on than is on the surface.
And exactly, other part of that story revolves around at least one character being aware that characters inside this game and story consist little more than just files to be manipulated, deleted, or moved.
And I think that's part of the appeal so much of when you have visual novels or stories that break the fourth wall. There's so many more options you can bring in terms of character dynamics. Like when you have a character who goes through an existential crisis, how would anyone handle, just finding out that they're part of a self-contained story and maybe their fates are already sealed? I feel like a lot of authors are drawn to this because it's a whole new world of possibility instead of the classical conflicts you see in literature.
I mean, how can I say the best? Because oddly enough, while you described it as a concept that teams with possibilities, my first reaction is, yeah, exactly how Isekai started. And it devolved into how it's easy to create in anime sphere one after another Isekai clones, let's say. But I still believe that Isekai as an idea is very ripe with potential. It just so happened that it devolved into the lowest common denominator. And the same can be said about fourth wall breaking. It can be used creatively. It opens up new opportunities how to tell the stories. And depending on how much you lean into that, maybe a comedic reprieve. I'll give you an example. Now that just popped into my head when I said the comedic reprieve. Blaze Blue takes it very seriously. It's lore. But it balances out that with a lot of gag scenarios that allows both characters, as in characters in the game, as well as voice actors of those characters to be very loose. So, crack a joke, make some funny comments, maybe scenarios. And one that sticks to my mind specifically in bad ends, when character refers to, God damn it, that was so hard. Why I can't beat this boss? The character that you lost us was annoyed. And the other person says, come on, don't you realize you're the boss? Your story will be hard. Like, okay, it makes sense. You're at the final stages, you're playing as a big bad boss, your story will be hard. It's not easy peasy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you'd see little fourth wall teases like that in arcade fighting games, especially in game over screens. They'd have little nods to the fact that this is an arcade game, and the developers had fun with it.
True.
Mm-hmm. I like how you mentioned earlier about fourth wall breaking being a nice premise, and it can be done well, and in some cases it can be done poorly.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure, many people are aware of the many copycats that visual novels have had for many years about the whole fourth wall breaking aspects. And some of them are done well and some of them are not. And that's usually where people tend to get a poor opinion of a lot of indie titles that kind of try to ride the wave of the newest fad instead of writing a well-crafted story instead. So then you get the whole stuff like you mentioned, isekais feeling very bland and formulaic. When the whole formula is nice, it's a great idea that a normal guy dies and is reincarnated into a fantasy land. And they get to be a hero exploring all the new crazy stuff in this fantasy world. And yet every time you get the same fantasy template of some medieval town of going into dungeons and fighting skeletons and slimes for gold. You know?
Yeah.
It could be any fantasy land, but unfortunately that's what people identify with isekai.
True.
For what it's worth, for Doki Doki Literature Club, I very much appreciated the experience and a lot of the themes it brought up. I felt that many parts of it as a visual novel were sorely lacking. The pacing was all over the place. There was only one music track. The visuals weren't anything special, and the writing wasn't particularly special either. I did like it from what I read of it before I wussed out because I cannot handle scary things at all.
I get you.
So I do appreciate what it did, but at the same time, it does have heavy flaws.
I don't want to rag on because it's very easy target to say. Take a popular VN and says, no, it's not that great, it's overvalued. I still believe Doki Doki Literature Group did a lot. I get its appeal, and I think it's a very good title to recommend for newbies in VN sphere to experience, because that's certainly something to experience. It's approachable in a lot of ways. It just, for me, it's a slice of life, which is already a hurdle in and of itself. And the twist to differentiate itself from other slice of life is just not that appealing to me.
That's fair.
But then again, it had some very cool moments and characters I really liked how they were portrayed and what they did using the breaking the fourth wall. I definitely liked Monica the best, and how they used a character being aware of fourth wall breaks happening to use it to her advantage. That was actually really impressive. Like, yes, there is a character who acknowledges there are choices in a video game about stories and consequences of those choices, and she will mess with your choices, so you'll pick what she wants. Yes, that's an interesting concept.
And by you, it, at first it's directed toward the main character, and it does morph into specifically you, reader.
Yes, true, exactly.
I like how you mentioned it's a classic and it's great for newbies, because there is another VN that I had in mind that predates Doki Doki Literature Club by quite a while. And Some people would say It's not
Oh.
Rather, it's a small title called Save the Date. Save the Date was released way back in 2013 as a small indie project from one individual, I believe. The premise is that you, the main character, wake up to go on a date with this nice chick you met. And very quickly, some incredible shenanigans happen. Like a giant squid attacks the cafe you're at, goes on a rampage, and she dies a horrible death. And you're like, oh no, and it's so sad. It's played for laughs.
Okay. I was going to say, that escalated quickly.
Yes, it escalated very quickly. So, of course, this being a visual novel, you restart the story, and you go through different choices to try to get a better outcome. And again, it's comedic because you go through all these things, and you make different choices in like locations or talking points and whatnot, and yet there's still more just ridiculous scenarios where your date goes horribly wrong and she dies a terrible death. Like, for anyone who's seen the movie, of course, it's Groundhog Day. In no ways. And the reason why, though, I'm bringing it up for today's episode is that it's very silly, but at a certain point, it's not silly anymore. Some of the philosophies behind it start getting taken seriously. For example, the whole idea that you are looping over and over, trapped in this same sort of day. The idea that you the reader playing as the main character, knows information from other playthroughs you've had, other failed dates, and you are somehow bringing that information to the main character to where he knows, actually, let's do all these different steps to avoid these bad endings. And not only that, the dialogue is funny too, because if you're watching this on YouTube, and you can see some of these scrolling backgrounds here, there are some ridiculous dialogue options you can ask. Like, she says, how did you know the deck was going to give out from under us and we were going to plummet to the cliffs below? And you can be like, I'm a wizard, or I'm actually from the future, or I reloaded from a save game. And again, those are hilarious answers, but this isn't a joke answer. Like, the story you'll actually say that, and she'll respond like semi-seriously, and then you'll go through the rest of the date, on this ridiculous premise. But then the more you play Save the Date, and the more farther you get in the story, it's like the more the characters come to realize that yes, there is something bigger going on. And the discussions that come from it really experiment with the whole idea of what a good ending is. Yeah, way back in the day when the visual novel scene was smaller, this was a bit of a classic. And I still remember it every so often, even here we are years later, almost a decade later from 2013. And in some ways, Save the Date kind of was ahead of its time. With some of the things it was doing, both in the story and outside the story, as a visual novel.
I have to say, it's very hard to, dig deeper into the game. When preparing for this episode and looking over the titles we want to bring, when I saw the Save the Date, I tried, and I think you understand, sometimes you look at the screenshot and how visual novel is presented, you get a general vibe of where they're going for. And here, I can't see the background, there's so many choices. And I got a vibe is, in a way, a very ridiculous one, given those choices. And at the same time, they're trying to make a point. And now listening to you talk about that visual novel making a point of something that is ridiculous, keeps repeating, and it stops being ridiculous at some point. You start to acknowledge the situation you're in, and it's slowly, I wouldn't say maddening because I don't know, I haven't read it, but I get that vibe of it from listening to you.
You're right.
I think this...
Not so much maddening, but you are right in that it's a silly premise, and you have fun entertaining it the first few times, and then the more you play, the more you and the characters take this whole looping thing seriously.
Mm-hmm. And probably this is a good time to also showcase our approach when it comes to breaking the fourth wall and our definition. Whereas for me, specifically, given consideration and the definition I cited before, I would say I feel the game is breaking the fourth wall when it acknowledges itself as a game. This is how I gauge as a rule of thumb. So the moment you told me that the game saying that they acknowledges other playthrough of itself, this is definitely breaking the fourth wall.
I would think that yes, this absolutely has meta elements where the characters are identifying themselves as something more than just characters in a story. They're part of something bigger involved with this time loop and with ridiculous choices on the screen and remembering stuff that happened in past events. As far as fourth wall breaks go, though, I don't think this technically counts because you, the reader, interacting with this game is still technically separate from the main character. Just like how, again, in the movie Groundhog Day, you're watching the movie and you're experiencing the same things Bill Murray's character is, but he's still the main character. It's still a story set on the movie screen.
Oh, and the entire looping is self-contained within the story, right?
Yes,
That's why you say it doesn't necessarily need to break the fourth wall. Does not break it because it's still self-contained.
Correct.
Okay, fair enough.
At least until the end where you might get to be a hacker.
Oh.
But I don't want to say too much about that.
Okay. Fair enough.
But again, this very much felt like a classic before its time. It addressed a lot of very interesting concepts that I don't think many people were aware of this VN when it came out. They got to experience with later, more famous titles.
Fair enough. I mean, this sounds something ridiculously interesting. I am very hesitant to say right up my alley. I'll add it to the backlog, which is already very overloaded as is. But at the very least, the concept is intriguing.
Yeah,
the idea
it's free, and it's still available for download over on the website. And it doesn't take that long, just a few hours if I remember correctly. So anyone who is interested, save the date. Totally check it out.
Yeah, I'm not making any promises, but at the very least, if it's short, maybe I could find a time. Now I'm super interested how it would coincide with my definition if I were to experience it.
On a different note, MR. But you did have time to bake a cake?
I mean, okay. I get the subtle hint. That was my next title I prepared. Let's talk about hate series. And specifically, I'll reference the quote you made. But before all that, let me just describe the game. Because the story, in its briefest description, can be summarized as a detective mystery about a lone investigator reading old logs from a derelict shipwreck.
Space shipwreck, right?
Yeah, space shipwreck, because it's sci-fi in nature. So, throughout the entire game, you play as in read through the eyes of an investigator who uses PC or some sort of terminal screen and interface device to interact with characters on a screen with choices they present to you to interact with. And the way I describe it, specifically that way, is the entire setup is exactly how a normal person in the real world plays visual novels. 1-to-1. You have a screen, you have a character appearing, and you have a choices.
And specifically, the choices he's trying to make is because he's trying to investigate why this spaceship is now ruined and abandoned.
Yeah.
And that involves digging through the deep history of the people that used to be on it.
It just so happened that he encounters AI, and those are the characters you will be interacting with. And why specifically I focus on the method is while, except for one particular scene, the game does not necessarily reference the player as main character, but every action you take and every time you do interact, you do so in such an immersive way, you might as well be breaking the fourth wall. This is a very flimsy argument from me because it does not necessarily do break it, but it sets up such a powerful immersion that it feels like it would.
Right, because you can see on the screenshots scrolling through on YouTube that the characters are usually referring to you. As you're reading through the logs, they ask you questions and your thoughts, and of course they mean the main character, but since you're seeing this visual novel through his eyes, his or her eyes, it feels like the AI characters are talking to you, the reader.
Exactly. And just to answer that before I forget, the very specific line you referenced is from a very wholesome moment, fully intended to break the fourth wall, in which a character gives you a recipe to bake the cake, gives you some time, and then asks you whether or not you did bake the cake. You have an option to say yes or no. After you say yes, the same character will ask you again, more directly, did you really bake the cake? I think they actually referenced the person behind the screen at that specific moment. Not sure, but I think they did. And you had an opportunity to say, no, I just wanted to say I did. But you didn't in the real world. And that was so cool and wholesome at the same time.
Yeah, legit. I don't remember the exact dialogue either, but yes, it was very directed for you, the person sitting in your chair. Go up and please bake a cake for me.
Exactly. Yep. This was that was the most blatant breaking the fourth wall they did.
Yes, that's pretty blatant.
And it stays with me to this day because it's such a well-crafted moment. Yes, you had an opportunity to lie, in essence, and the game gave you the opportunity to come clean also. So, meaning you could choose, yes, I baked the cake. Then the game pressures you, did you really? And you can admit, no, but I just wanted to be nice. And the game says, okay, that's fair. You don't want to be to respond in kind to AI who gave you the recipe, was very enthusiastic for you to check it, and you say no. You really wanted to say yes, even though you don't have it on you, you don't have the time or energy to bake the cake, so you wanted to respond to yes, but the game then checks, did you really did it? And it's fine if you didn't. At least you came clean.
It's more involved than just that, too. There's several steps involved in this whole process for talking to you.
Exactly. That one was so wholesome. Oh.
I liked how that also tied into the story that was being told at the time. True. This is in its sequel, Hate Plus. And so the subject matter in that ties pretty well into the request without going into too much detail, otherwise I'd be here for a while.
yeah, exactly. It is well connected.
But yeah, it is directly a request to the reader, which you obviously don't see much of that in many other visual novels,
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of time it's self-contained within the story. If it's, for example, just a romance story, you'll see the main character and someone else getting into a relationship, and there will be obstacles within the story of the main character overcoming and whatnot. And depending on how self-inserty it is, the reader gets to see a happy story and resolution. So when you have elements that break the fourth wall, it really feels more like you, the reader, is becoming part of the story. Or the story extends to you, either way. Because at the very least, you also get fun community stuff where over on the Steam page, there's all sorts of pictures of people showing off the really cool cakes they made.
Yes, I vividly remember that. I was so jealous. Yeah.
Those are some very nice cakes. I'm sure there were some professionals there.
Definitely. And for all of those that weren't, and they still look great, more kudos to you, because holy heck, I'm even more jealous than. Yeah, but that's a title. That's a title.
Very much. Let's see. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about in regards to breaking the fourth wall. And that is for visual novels that were on the Nintendo DS.
Okay.
A whole lot of titles are on the computer, and so you just interact with them on your screen through mouse and keyboard. The Nintendo DS was a handheld video game system that had... Its most significant feature was that it had two screens. It opened up like a flip phone, and you had a screen on the top, and you had a bottom screen with that also functioned as a touchpad. And so there were many games that took advantage of this feature, and there were some visual novels that got really creative as well. I don't think, technically speaking, many of them broke the fourth wall, but there were a few very interesting approaches they took to reflect the fact that you were playing on a unique setup, one of which is Hotel Dusk, which was about a detective investigating a matter at a hotel and meeting all sorts of interesting characters. You would actually hold this sideways, more like a book. So you'd have the two screens, and they'd be long ways vertically, and on the left you'd have a portrait shot of one character speaking to a portrait shot of another character on the right.
Wait a moment, my mind just exploded the moment you said so. This changes the context of screenshots I'm looking at completely.
Yes. Again, if you can see the screenshots going by on YouTube, they're the kind of hand-drawn, sketchy-looking ones. And half of it, there's like a line going down the middle, and you can see half of it on the left and half on the right. Those are two separate screens.
That makes so much more sense. I was thinking maybe they're going for the comic style of typical comics with panels. But no, those are screens. Oh, God. That's so cool.
Yes, and another thing with Hotel Dusk is that one of its most famous moments is that at one point, for part of the story, you have to physically close the Nintendo DS to bring one character over to the other character.
So you had to touch the screens to get... Oh, God. That's so hilarious.
Physically close it like a flip cell phone, and then open it back up, and the story would reflect them bonking heads, basically.
Crazy. Oh, my God.
A few other games also did that whole concept of physically closing the DS to advance or whatever, but Hotel Dusk is a rare visual novel case where it was implemented. And nowadays you can't really do that because you would need to find the old Nintendo DS system, which at this point is like 15 years old, and technology has moved on.
Now my mind needs to process everything you said. I think, given my definition, those are definitely breaking the fourth wall, because the game acknowledged itself as a game, so you had to perform a physical act. Oh, that's so cool! That's so cool. At the very least, if it's not fourth wall breaking, if it's not, it's
very,
cool.
very unique setup for telling this story. But with that, I just wanted to cover that one because that's the most notable. But the Nintendo DS allowed for some very unique setups with storytelling. Unfortunately, I don't really think we'll see much of it anymore. Nowadays, game systems aren't quite that uniquely physically set up, so we're back to one screen.
Yeah, I mean, being practical won over being peripheral and a gimmick, I guess.
Unfortunately.
But maybe someday we'll see something crazy again. With that being said, I think this is the end. This is where we have to put a curtain on our play and finish it. So thank you everybody for listening. Please comment your favorite fourth wall breaking moment and have a good day.
Thank you everyone.